I'm Ari. I am a PhD student at the University of Exeter. I'm part of the WSA Centre for Doctoral Training. And today we're going to listen to a talk from Ole Mark. And Ole, I'm lucky enough to have as my industrial supervisor for my PhD. And he is, when I first met him, he was working with DHI, who produced the Mike urban hydraulic modelling software, and he has a history with the development of that software, and he was the manager of DHI's research portfolio at the time, and he hosted me there in Copenhagen, which was fantastic. Now he's the head of innovation at Krüger, and his speciality is in the data-driven real-time modelling of urban drainage systems in order to sort of protect infrastructure and reduce pollution events from combined sewer overflows, and particularly in the face of mitigating the changes that we'll see through climate change. I think he's going to speak to us today about how you can incorporate those future climate predictions into our assessments for urban flooding, and what we should do once we've made those assessments. So, Ole, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you very much, Ari, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thank you to the Water Security Alliance for giving me the opportunity to give this talk. I was told that I should give a talk which should be aiming at like state of the art and practitioners, and at the same time backed up by science. So what you're seeing here, I'll not show you a lot of differential equations. I will show you the outcome of maybe something like 10 years of work, how we have approached how to quantify the impact from climate change in terms of urban flooding, and how we can use the predictions for the future to act upon. So the title today is Modeling and Analysis of the Impacts from Climate Change on Urban Flooding. First of all, when we are talking about climate change, I'll not give you a long talk about climate change, but I'll still just set the scene just with respect to climate change, so we are all on the same level. Just a few slides before we go to the flooding business. When we talk about climate change, I briefly just take here from the IPCC 6th assessment report how they're looking at the projections into the future depending on which scenario will develop. It's very important when we talk about climate change and we talk about the future. Sometimes people think, well, we make one flood map for the future, and that is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. But even if we're working with a specific climate scenario, then I have just indicated here for one of them, there's still an uncertainty to how this scenario will develop, and which of the scenarios is going to be the future. It all depends on if US will sign a treaty, if they won't, how the population growth is going to be, how other countries are backing up on the reduction of climate gases. So there's a lot of uncertainties, but this will not prevent us from still doing modeling and to safeguard the society, because today we know enough about the changes for the future to make projections and to make flood maps which are valuable to protect the society. So usually people talk about the CO2 concentrations in the air. It's converted into temperature, and again that is converted into maps, as you might have seen, like this, which is a global map showing you how much will the precipitation, the rainfall, how much, somebody apparently unmuted for a while, how much will the rainfall change if we have a 1.5 degree of global warming, a 2 degree, a 4 degree, and you can say the challenge is, how do I get this into a flood depth in my backyard, in my city? How do I get around doing this? And how, when I have done that, how can I turn that into information which is usable to safeguard the society? So this is still from the working group, from the IPCC. And then if we just also take a little bit in how important is this issue actually, if we look a little bit, this is like looking in the mirror, in the rearview mirror, looking back. Well, we need to look forward. I just want to show you, when we're looking at the number of hazards and catastrophes which has happened, extreme events in the past. I think you should try and here pay attention to. This is from Munich Re, where the blue ones, they indicate the number of hydrological events, basically the flooding, where you can see from 1980 that the number of events is simply increasing a lot. And this indicates, and I want just to tell you briefly that when we're looking at this is not just an impact from climate change when we're looking at the change in the hydrological events, it's also how the cities develop. Today, I'm going to talk about how the climate is developing and how that will change the flood pattern. But when we're looking into the future, you also need to remember the cities will change. You will get more hard surfaces. More hard surfaces will you give more runoff, and it will also give more flooding. But we are basically looking at something which is a huge problem, and it costs really a lot of money. Just one small case of what it has looked like in the past. There will be a few more small cases, but just India getting 944 millimeter in 24 hours and having damages for 400 million pounds. So it's really a lot of money where we can go, and we need to figure out how can we reduce the flooding. That's one thing you need to be aware of when we're talking about flooding, that is, it will be impossible to remove flooding completely. Because when you have a city, you will do a design. Somebody will determine, maybe we design this part of the city so it's flood-proof for 50-year rain. But that still means that once every 50 years on average, you'll have one rain which exceeds your design criteria. We cannot design all of the world for design criteria which is equivalent to a 1,000-year return period. We haven't got enough money, it wouldn't make sense. But even if you design for a 1,000-year return period, you'll still be where you will have a 1 per 1,000 probability that you're going to exceed the design criteria and you will have flooding. So one thing is to, people will say eliminate the floods. This is not going to happen. You're going to reduce the floods and the associated flood damages. Why are we doing this? I'll just briefly come with some of the drivers. Well, we basically, when we're looking at today's climate and we're looking under the future climate change, then you will see we have existing infrastructure which has a very high value and at the same time might be very vulnerable. It can be metro stations, it can be houses, it can be a lot of stuff, it can be kindergartens. But we basically need to exist to protect what has already been built. When we build something new today, then we also need to look into the crystal ball. It would be wrong only to look into the past and use the design storms of the past, because they're going to be too small. So if we are looking into the past and only using the design storms from the past, we're going to under-design and we are going to create problems for ourselves in the future. So new infrastructure, which is going to be built tomorrow, this year, it needs to be climate proof, and we need to apply a stronger design range compared to what we did in the past. I also wrote here, we have a need to protect values, because there's more value in the city than only the infrastructure. You have the public health. When you are having flooding, people will some places be walking in a mixture of rainwater and toilet water, wastewater. They may get diseases. There's a lot of things which needs to be protected. Basically, when we are looking at this, we need to look at climate change. We need to look at both the increase in rainfall, but also in sea level rise, because if you have a city located by the ocean, the downstream boundary for a rainfall runoff model, for a flood model, may be the sea, and in the future, the sea may block the natural runoff from a sea. And when we're looking at when we want to do this, I have said, well, all cities now are wrote in the developed world, which is actually not maybe the best thing to say, but I would say in parts where you have urban developments, that should be a more accurate, with more than 50,000 inhabitants. This is where I would say you can also do it for smaller areas, but they tend to be less densely populated. But I say every time you have a city all over the world with more than 50,000 inhabitants, you basically need to stop and think. Just a thing, now I just previously showed the IPCC models, which is the global models. And then you will ask, how on earth do I get from an IPCC model down to something which is usable for me if I want to do some computations of the flood risk in my town? And here you have something which is called downscaling. I'll only show you the basic principles, where you are going from what people call a GCM, a global circulation model. And this is basically where at the level where IPCC, they are making the computations. It's a grid which runs all around the world in a rough resolution. It's a large grid. And then you need to downscale this. And usually this will be your local meteorological institute where you are living. There will also be somebody who will take the responsibility and do it all over the world. And they will take the predictions, which is coming from that the rain will increase with maybe 10% on an annual basis, down to the point where they will give you the change in rainfall on an hourly basis for your local region, maybe down to a scale of 1.5 or 1.5 or 3 by 3 kilometers. And when you have got information about the future, how is it going to change, then you can change it basically, as I'll just show you an example, into changes in the design rain. So here I have been digging into, I just took the Danish national design standards for how to deal with climate change. And this will basically tell you that based on statistical downscaling, if I'm looking 50 years into the future, I need to take my 2-year design rain and multiply it with a factor of 1.1, meaning it's going to be like 10% stronger compared to what I see today. A lot of places you will be looking into what is going on in 100 years, and for parts of Denmark where you have urban drainage systems, which is a mixture of combined sewage, combined sewer system. The factor is 1.3, meaning that if I was looking into the past, I need to multiply my design rain with a factor of 1.3 or increase the design rain with 30%. In a similar way, you see for 100-year rain. So when you have this information, that's the time where you can then start to say, now, this is decided for a specific climate scenario, I need to tell you. So in Denmark, the government has taken the responsibility to choose a scenario and had made an analysis and come up with this. Basically, it's not the government, basically it's the Danish Wastewater Association, but never mind. Somebody with authority has taken the responsibility. So throughout the last, you can see since 2014, when you have designed a sewer system in Denmark, it has been designed to be like 30% larger than if we had no climate change. And this will climate proof the sewer system, hopefully, for the next 100 years. So just when people, sometimes they hear when we talk about Denmark, then we say, oh, Denmark is small, you don't have any flooding. I'll just show you a few pictures that, well, in Denmark, we do have flooding as well. In 2011, the city of Copenhagen was hit with a storm where the flood damages was in the order of 1.5 billion euro. 1.5 billion euro. So there is certainly room to develop science and models to figure out how are we going to reduce these flood damages, because this was in the year 2011, and in 100 years, well, the rainstorms will most likely be 30% larger. So one of the tools to do this, that's hydraulic modeling, and then people will usually ask me, which model should I choose? And I'll just give you a very quick rundown through this, because if you're using a one-dimensional model, it's basically only simulating the flow with the pipes. Flow will come to the surface and go down in the same spot again. You'll not have any overland movement. So if you're looking at a 1D hydraulic model, you can use it to see at which locations will I have a problem, but you cannot use it at all to quantify the problem. Around the middle of the 1990s. The 1D approach was developed, a 1D hydrodynamic model below ground, and then you would have a one-dimensional flow above ground as well. So you would include the street and an exchange between the pipe system and the street, and the water on the surface could flow in one direction along the street and go down to an intersection and flow along the next street. This is an approach which is still used today if you haven't got hold of a 2D model or you still want to do some fast modeling. Basically, you will see that in most parts of the world, urban flooding is done by a 1D, 2D, where you have the pipe net below ground and you have a 2D digital terrain model on the surface. And you have a number of softwares out there which can do this today. You have the models from Bentley, InfoWorks, you have the models from DHI, the Mike models, you have the SWIM models with a 2D surface model. So this is readily available, and these models have been around for something like since 2005, 7, 10, something like this. Some people will say maybe such a model is costly, and I would say, well, maybe such a model will cost you, I don't know, ballpark number 20,000 euro. I'm not too sure. But mind you, we are talking about damages in millions of euro or maybe even billions of euro. So it's a small investment to safeguard your city, but also cheaper tools will be available. What I'll show you here will be done with 2D modeling because I find it most easy and most convenient. So just a small look at what does it actually look like then when you take and put your real world into a model. I just took a screenshot from my own software here. And here you can then see that the blue, that's the underground storm drainage pipe. Here you have a basin. And then you will see you have basically a digital terrain model and an aerial photo. Then you take this city. This is the city of Greve. It was flooded in around the year 2002 to 3, 4. And then you can take the rainfall, which fell historically on the city, and then you can run a simulation. And then the green stuff, as you now see on the surface, slowly moving around, that is the flooding which occurred for this event where we did the simulations. So you can clearly see that if you were trying to run this like with a one-dimensional model, it wouldn't work. You can see how the model is simply moving the water on the surface down here. And this is a pond where the water is supposed to be. And here you will see this is the high school. And here you see this is the city hall. And here you then have the flood map as it is simulated during the historical rain. And then you will ask me, what has this got to do with real life? And I will just click here. And down here in, I don't know if you can see it, in the right-hand corner, you will see this is actually the high school. So this line you can see here, this red building, that is the building as you are having down here. So this is a photograph during the event, and you can see they are kind of up to the hip in water. Usually it's actually a little bit difficult when you have an urban flood model to verify it because you don't plan to have sensors. So you need to rely on photos, and afterwards you need to look at the photo and go out and look what was actually the level of this bench we are having here. What did it look like? In this way you can verify an urban flood model. But then when you have a flood model and you have set it up and you have calibrated to the extent possible, then the next thing is you can try to run it, and then you will now say, now I want to get rid of the flood problem. In order to safeguard your new infrastructure as you're going to build, then you will run the model for a future. In Denmark, you run it for future climate, a 10-year rain in the year 1100. So we took, this was the historical rain, and then we ran it one more time. This is not the animation, this is only the maximum flood depths. So this is the flood pattern you're looking at in the year 2100. And this is what you need, where you need to reduce the flooding. And when I was younger, I was sitting developing flood models, what much younger and developing software. And here I need to tell you that, well, all the hydrodynamic models, they're basically stupid. And when I say they're stupid, it's because they cannot tell you the solution. They can only come up with the computations. They can do the computations of the advanced math. But you need to figure out, how do I get rid of this? And you also need to figure out the flood damages. We'll get a little bit back to the flood damages, but first of all, we need some engineering knowledge to see how am I going to get these volumes, this flood map, to be reduced, so I don't get the same flood damages one more time. And here in this case, actually they behind the high school, they have a football field. We went for a field trip, we had a look. And when we were looking at it, then you look at the football field, actually it has a small set of, you can say, embankments around, erased ground for maybe for people to sit. So we actually proposed, well, you have a flood basin in here. If you just close the gap, put in some soil. And the extra cost for the high school students would be they needed to walk over this small additional 1 meter of soil every time they want to play football. Well, if they can play football, they can also just walk over as this small hill. So what we did was we took in the model, closed the gap, and then in the model we installed a pump on the corner of the high school, which would start when the water level was 1.5 meters below ground. We redrained the model. And then this flood map for the future is turning into a flood map where you can see we have reduced the flooding significantly, and all the water is now located inside the football field and can later on be released down to the sewer system. Then you need to look into what does a pump cost, and a pump cost in the order of 200,000 euro. You would need to do some work. So this will raise the question, is this worthwhile doing? And this is actually where I'm going to go next, because when you have the flooding, you need to estimate what is actually my flood damages, how do I get rid of it? That's the modeling, but is it worthwhile to do it? So I'll just show you a little bit about computation of flood damages, because we need to take the flood map and turn it into money. But basically what we will do is we will take flood characteristics, a flood map. We will take the buildings, the land use, crunch it into some damage functions. And then we will see the flood map when it intersects with the houses and the damages. How much does it cost? And this is one of the things which we did on the Dhaka city in the EU FP7 Corfu project, where we were simply making a flood map for Dhaka city. Here we have the land use, commercial, community services, educational services. And then every time that you intersect, then we assign a value. I'll just get back to this. We assigned a value to the flood damage to the house according to the depth and according to the percentage of the house being flooded. You can then get here damage per building and sum it up to get you the total flood damage. The flood damages, typically you can use a constant per square meter, or as we also did, we were working on a project where you have a flood damage, this is in pound per square meter, as function of the water depth. This is basically to reflect that if you have like 2 centimeters of water in your house, maybe the floor is ruined. If you have 1 meter, maybe it's a copper, the television, all the electrical installations. So depending on if it's residential, office, shops, educational, you can develop curves and apply these curves to get a better description of the flood damage as function of the water depth. This way you assign a higher penalty to a larger depth. When you have done this, then you will basically be moving to the next step, meaning, what should I do? And when we're talking about flood proofing, then you can say, well, if when you're looking at this, if I make a small matrix like this, where my heading is do nothing, new structures, then you'll say, if I don't do anything, my expenses for structural work, that's 0. But if I, at the same time, will also have to realize that then I will continue to have flooding this year of XX, euro or dollar. I don't know. I have been mixing up euro and dollar on this one. And in 100 years, it will be much more. So the balance will be then to say, well, if I implement some new structures today, I need to pay some money. They will cost me some money. I can then, when I have introduced these new structural measures, basin, pumps, whatever I do, then I will have been reducing the flood damages, and in the year 2120, it will hopefully also be significantly less. So you'll be sitting and looking like an investment. If I can reduce the flooding with more than I invest and I spend on my structures, then it's a good business for society, and it should be done because it will make sense. If I need to spend more money than the cost of the flood damages, it's not a good financial thing to do, and then you should do it for other reasons, basically. I'll just show you just some small example, which my colleagues here in Krüger Veolia has just been doing last year, that they have simply been making how to do this. They've simply been making the flood maps. That was in 2020, a small flood map. Then they use a new rainfall where you can see the rain is increasing. Then they propose climate adaptation, and they cannot remove all of the flooding, but this is the best they can do. And then they look here, the flood damage over 100 years. They will be looking, what is the flood damage for a 10-year storm, a 25-year storm, a 50-year storm, a 100-year storm. Sum it up. That was summed up to something like 84 million euro. After adaptation, they will have a flood cost still, because they cannot get rid of it, of 31 million euro, and they propose structural measures of they propose here that the money they have to spend will be like 20 million. So, sorry about this. So here you can see if they spend structural costs of 20 million plus 31 million, it's still significantly less than the 84 million. So in this case, it's a good business. The problem here may be when you're all over the world, around the world, who is going to pay for the flood proofing? Should it be the municipality who's paying, or which is paying for the flood proofing? Well, to them, it will only be an expense, whereas it will be an income, or for the insurance company, they have to pay less insurance. And at the same time, you also have the people who will have less flood damages. So usually all over the world, you will see that people would, because it's also difficult to say who is responsible for the pipes in the ground and the flooding, it would be the municipality who should be paying for this. The municipality will have to pay, but they don't get a direct income out of the expense they do to flood proofing. So sometimes it's a little bit of a haggle who's going to pay for the flood proofing. When we are talking about solutions and we're talking about climate change and flooding, I will say do map the flood risk of the future. This is the starting point, because when you know your flood risk, you have a flood map, then you can see how much is at stake. Am I flooding a kindergarten? Am I flooding a hospital? In Denmark in 2011, the emergency central where the trauma center, they call it, where they receive people who have been in traffic accidents, they had to close it down for 2 hours. Is that acceptable to society? Well, it wasn't in Denmark, but do map the flood risk, see it. And when you have doing this and you know the flood risk, you do have the option of not doing anything, but at least it's an informed decision that you don't do anything. Or you can try to remove the risk with structural measures and non-structural measures. And I will just have a structural measures that will build something with concrete, basins, pumps, but I also just briefly touch about non-structural measures, how you can reduce the flood damage without building anything. When we are talking about flooding, I usually want to show the floods mitigation cycle, where it's like a wheel rolling. Time is moving from 1, 2, 3, 4, and then time takes another round. So usually you are sitting developing in period 1 a strategy. Maybe it takes a year or 2, and then you will start to implement your strategy how to reduce the flooding. Mind you, even though you design for a 50-year or 100-year return period, you will still get a flooding sooner or later. It's just a matter of time. So at a certain time, your Met Office will still issue a flood warning, and it will come maybe 1 hour, maybe half a day, maybe 1 day in advance. And then you actually have time for preparation to do something, to start to flood-proof your city, to reduce the flood damages. When the rain is falling, you may have an active flood response, and afterwards you will have recovery and rehabilitation to clean up and to learn. After this, you will learn your lessons, you will develop a new flood mitigation strategy, implement it, and you will be hit by a new flooding. For sure, this is going to happen. It's only a matter of time, depending on your design criteria. Well, that was just a picture coming up from when I was living in Thailand, just to show you a street with cars where people are still driving around, but we'll get back to this. Good. And at this time, well, I know this is a little bit annoying, but this is like when you're watching your best television show, there's a commercial break. But basically, it's because we next week have somebody talking about data-driven flood forecasting. And I would like to highlight this presentation as well, because I'm going to talk a little bit about flood forecasting, but Dr. Krüger, he will be telling you about data-driven modeling of flood forecasting in urban drainage systems, which is highly relevant. Commercial break over, back to business. But what you can basically do when you get a flood warning, you can take the input from a numerical weather prediction model or from a weather radar. Here in my company, we have developed a small application taking the information from a weather radar, setting it onto a 2D hydrodynamic model. And this means that you, in advance, will have computation of flood maps, which streets are flooded and how much. And then you can start your flood proofing. Evacuate people if this is what you want to do. Close roads if you can see the water depths are too high, or maybe move people away from their houses. And in this way, reduce the flood damages. And this is what I call informed real-time flood management. And in order to do this, it's a good idea to have a mapping of the flooding before it happens. So you have a couple of hours in advance to do something, or you can still make a catalog of floods, a 5-year flood, if you are designing 5-year, 10-year, 25, and see where are my vulnerable parts in town, what should I do? You can train your emergency staff in handling the floods before they arrive, so they know where to go, how many sandbags they should have, how big pumps they should have. And at the same time, you can also do the forecast to the public radio mobile phones. Just showing you an example. This is, there was a flood warning this winter in Denmark. This is not for rainfall, for extreme rainfall. This is for coastal flood, but they go out with an emergency response where this is a water tube. They pump it up with water, and this is like 1 meter high to build a flood defense 5 hours before that the maximum peak of the flood will arrive. You can do exactly the same thing with different measures for your rainfall fed flooding, for your pluvial flooding. If you want to, you can also inform your population. If you inform, when I say if you want to, it's good to inform the population, very good indeed, but you need to be aware that then you need to be sending out communication which are not confusing and which doesn't create panic and which is clear for people to understand. This is why I put it on the second line. Of course, it's the correct thing to inform the public, but if you want to put a flood map on a mobile phone of somebody, there will be an uncertainty to the flood map. You really need to know what you're doing communication-wise if you start to send information to mobile phones. Just a warning. And here, we are getting a little bit closer towards the end, but I just want to show you flood proofing. And let me just see here. I want to show you a small movie here. Yep, this is a number of years ago from Asia. We'll just take it one more time. Yeah. Oh, this was maybe a little bit too fast. Let's try, see if or don't need to hit the stomach. Here's something like this. A situation like this is caused by rainfall. Well, it doesn't need to happen. But if you want to prevent a situation like this, it's a prerequisite that you know that it may happen. This is where a flood map comes in very handy, and you can do a flood map saying, well, I'm going to have like 20 centimeter of water for a 100-year rainstorm at this entrance to my shopping mall, underground shopping mall, or to my metro station. So I need to do something. And this is where you can see flooding an underground area like this. It really costs a lot of money. I don't know if you can imagine if it was the tube in England or your local metro station, wherever you are all over the world. But you actually have means to do this easily as long time as you know what you're doing. Maybe this is a little bit blunt to say flood proofing, the easy way, but just showing you. In Italy, they actually put down some small metal bars, and they have some aluminum bars they can slide in here with some rubber fittings, so they simply block the entrance. So you can do exactly the same if it's the entrance to a metro station, or you can do what people have been doing here. This is the entrance to a metro station. They have made a flood map, and they actually took a 1,000-year rainfall, a rain with a 1,000-year return period. And this is from the city of Copenhagen. This is by coincidence actually the church where I was christened behind here. But this is the entrance to the metro station. And the only thing they did was they have built 2 steps to flood-proof the metro station. So they have made a flood map for all over Copenhagen. I think they have figured out that if the metro was flooded, it would be under a standstill for a year and a half. And the damages would still also be, I think, 1 or 2 billion euro. So here you can see the flood proofing is as simple as some concrete. Of course, it may be more expensive if you also want to make sure that people can enter if they're using a wheelchair. But anyway, this entrance did only have stairs, so there will be a shaft which is flood proof for wheelchairs and with an elevator somewhere else. But just to let you know, now I was sitting talking about flood proofing, and I was saying, well, this costs so and so many million to do. You also have solutions which are actually easily to implement and very cheap. So when we are talking about flood proofing for future climate, then I would like to say, well, you will start to figure out, will there be a problem? And you do that by finding your local rainfall. You find out how much is it going to be increased in the future. Contact your local meteorological institute. You run a simulation. Second, you will have to have a look, how big will the problem be? Actually, you will see in some parts of the world, and also there will be some parts of Denmark, even you increase the rainfall with 30%. Well, some people have still designed the sewers so it doesn't give a flood problem, which actually costs money because the water will be running into a park, into a green area, which might not be usable for a couple of days or a day, but that's it. So how big will the problem be? Next thing I have written, that is a little bit, when will it arrive? Because if you're sitting and you're making a simulation of what will the flood look like in 100 years, then you also need to tell the storyline of the city. Can I change the city? Can I change something? Do I have some development plans? So there will be some old houses which needs to go anyway. Should they be turned into a green area, a nature-based solution for flood storage? Or what should I do? And also you need to remember that some of your infrastructure, like pumping stations and stuff like this, it will not live 100 years. It needs to be replaced anyway. So when you're replacing old infrastructure, broken pipes, worn down pipes, pumps, maybe that would be the time to operate it. And finally, you need to make these computations here about, and this is where Exeter has also been doing some brilliant work. What will the flooding cost? What will it cost to get rid of the flooding? So you make something which is good for society. And here, yes, of course, how can damages be reduced? So just to conclude this small section, that get some flood mapping done for the future climate. You can do it. You have the information. It's possible. We have enough information. maybe you don't know if you should do climate scenario RPC 4.5 or another one, then I would say, then you do both and make a risk analysis and see what are the results. There's no reason you can say not to act, not to do the flood map, so you know which risks you're facing in the future. And finally, there's something we do want to avoid. That is situations like this, and they can be avoided, because when I'm just showing you this map, in the end, this is a picture which was taken a couple of years ago, where they had made the flood map, but they hadn't been flood proofing yet. This was the control of a pumping station. So if you had a flood map, you would easily know that this was going to be flooded, and how to reduce a flood damage like this? Well, you would just take this piece of this shelf with electronics, and you would put it up like 1.5 meters above the water level, and it would be safe, and your pump would be working. I think that was my time to tell you about how to deal with climate change and how to deal with urban flooding. And I would say I have just thrown in one slide with some of the main references. I'll also throw in some links. And in the references, I know this talk is going to be videoed, so it will be available publicly. But there you can find the science behind, and the pictures from the talk will be there if you need them for something else. And otherwise, you're always most welcome to get hold of me and contact me. So thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, please ask.